Good morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me here to speak, but also, of course, for making welfare such an important topic at this conference. I think everyone who attended the IFAR session yesterday would be really encouraged by so much good work that's going on around the world. This morning, I want to talk about welfare in Australia. I'll share with you the perspective of breeders, but also discuss a case study touching again on what Jamie showed earlier on. Obviously, in October last year, we were hit very hard by a story that really affected the industry in a very broad way. As David mentioned, I was a journalist before taking on this role and worked for the Sydney Morning Herald. So I'll share with you just a few insights from a journalist's perspective and from an editor's perspective when dealing with some of these stories. I want to start, though, by just giving you a quick snapshot of the Australian industry. We're very lucky in Australia. Essentially, the thoroughbred industry is huge. As David mentioned, 14,000 foals born a year, second largest in the world. We also have about 3,000 race meetings and 19,000 races right across the year. We're also very fortunate that racing is a mainstream sport in Australia. In the biggest selling newspapers in the country, every day, you have the form cards. And when we have champions like Winx and Black Caviar, their achievements are often chronicled on the front pages, at the start of news bulletins in the evening, and our most famous human participants, whether it's Gay Waterhouse or Chris Waller, in Australia, they are household names. And I think one of the statistics that highlights the sort of, I guess, really the penetration of racing in Australia is the fact that 1 in every 244 Australians owns a share in a racehorse, which is really quite a remarkable statistic. I think the closest country to that is Ireland, where it's about 1 in 7,000 people have a share. If you look at the industry from an economic standpoint, we contribute over $9 billion to the nation's economy every year and employ somewhere just over 70,000 full-time jobs. So this is a huge industry, especially when you consider that Australia, the population is 24 million, so relatively small. So really, we've got this strong industry and we are really part of the cultural fabric of the nation. So given this, it might be fair to think that we're well protected from criticism. This industry that does so much for the country, so well accepted, would be cocooned from critics. But I think there's some other information which really reflects the changing societal landscape. So in Australia, 86% of the population live in a city or a major town. So this means that we have fewer people being brought up with a connection with the horse, and also fewer people who have an understanding of how livestock is raised and the challenges that this entails. The political landscape also demonstrates this. So in Victoria, the home of the Melbourne Cup, the Animal Justice Party, which, as its name suggests, is a single-issue party ideologically opposed to the use of animals in sport, received more than 80,000 votes in the last state election. So this party, which is always trying to put animal welfare issues into the public debate, has strengthened its legitimacy because it now has representatives both in the Victorian State Parliament. Martin Pakula, the racing minister there, just saying they got 1, which is right, and they've got 1 in New South Wales as well. So these are the 2 biggest states in Australia, and a party set up really just to drive the debate around animal welfare has seats there. There's also the Greens Party, which is critical of racing. In Australia, it calls for the abolition of jumps racing. Well, the Green Party received more than 1.5 million votes at the last general election. And they have members of parliament in every state parliament, as well as strong representation in the Senate, the federal body. As you might expect, the support for both of those parties is very strong in the cities and less so in the regions. So given this political support, it's no surprise that the animal welfare lobby is very strong in Australia. I should also say it's very effective. I'm going to give you two examples from outside racing first. So back in 2011, the national broadcaster, the ABC, aired footage of Australian cattle being cruelly and viciously beaten in Indonesia. The footage sparked outrage and became a major political issue. And just 8 days after the programme went to air, the Labour government at the time suspended the export of all live cattle from Australia. Now it's worth just considering that this wasn't a small industry. The live export of cattle is worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's especially important to Northern Australian agrarian sector. Despite this, trade wasn't resumed for 3 months. And in fact, it took more than 3 years for that trade to get back to the level it was before the ban. The second example is from 2015 and involves the greyhound industry. And some of you may have heard of this. Again, this Ferrari was driven by coverage aired by the ABC, and this time greyhounds were being fed small animals as live bait to encourage them to chase the lure faster when they were racing. The reaction was explosive. The industry was forced to try and respond to a huge public outrage. Within 24 hours of that show going to air, the New South Wales state government had announced a formal inquiry into the live baiting, and that report was published 4 months later. The government sat on it for 3 weeks before giving their formal response, and what they did next, I think, surprised everyone, not just in the industry, but around the country. The government decided to ban the sport and gave it 12 months to be wound down. All of the polling at the time suggested that this decision, taken by a Conservative government, had broad public support. And that's not really surprising, because so many people knew nothing about the greyhound racing industry, so they were easily influenced when this show went to air. The industry, combined with some very influential voices in the media, rallied against the ban, and it was ultimately reversed, with the government putting in place very tight regulation. But it's still remarkable that a government would shut down an industry that employed 10,000 people on the back of such a show. As you can imagine, that also has emboldened animal activists. So it's against that background that we saw the ABC air another program last year, The Final Race. Now, you've already seen some of it, but I'll just give you a very brief.
And we're seeing a second horse here. He's been pulled out by the neck. There he is. And for the horses inside, it's even more horrific.
The images you're about to see are confronting. Covert cameras record horses being beaten and abused, others stomped and kicked.
As that and the previous clips show, the footage was incredibly distressing, and I don't think anybody watching could feel anything but horrified. I should say that it was a 45-minute show, and there were many minutes of such footage, and worse as well. So the show focused tightly on what happens to some horses after their careers in racing. It also provided a platform for campaigners against racing to air their grievances.
Equates to about 4,000 racehorses killed in this one abattoir alone.
4,000?
4,000, probably closer to 5,000.
Now, at no point in the show were the campaigners asked to provide any evidence for those claims. And of course, when those claims are made on the back of such shocking imagery, they get real traction. So, as mentioned earlier, the programme went to air 2 days before the Caulfield Cup and the Everest. For those that don't know, the Caulfield Cup is one of Australia's most historic races, while the Everest, the new kid on the block, is worth $14 million. So, of course, this timing was very deliberate. Here we are on a Thursday night being shown horses being horribly mistreated and presented as an industry that doesn't care about its animals. 2 days later, we have 2 races worth a combined $19 million. That juxtaposition was very deliberate, asking people to think we were an industry awash with money, and yet we couldn't look after our horses. And it's worth just saying that wherever you are in the world, racing is a very obvious target for campaigners and the media alike. We race for a lot of money. Horses are bought and sold for lots of money. And the sport enjoys the patronage of people whose names easily make the headlines. If you're in the UK, you might think of the Queen, the Aga Khan, Sheikh Mohammed, the Oppenheimers here in South Africa, and in America you have people like celebrity chef Bobby Flay. So I want to share with you just a little bit of a journalist perspective. Shortly after the programme went to air, I was talking with a very senior member of the Australian federal government. And he said to me, I was just so disappointed. It was as if the media wanted to hit racing at the worst possible time. I have to say I was a bit taken aback by that comment, really the naivety of it. Whether you're an editor of a news organisation or whether you're a journalist working on a story like that, you want to ensure that story has the maximum impact. I've no doubt that the journalist who worked on this, when she was producing that show, was thinking about winning a Walkley Award. That's Australia's highest journalism award. And how do journalists decide whether their story has made an impact? Well, these days, the traction it gets on social media initially. The next way to judge is how many news outlets have to follow your story. So how many other journalists now have to write about what you've put out there? Other benchmarks include, does the story result in somebody getting sacked? Does the government have to call an inquiry? Does the story result in a change to legislation? All of those things are important for journalists and how they rate a big story like that. And of course, if it ticks many of those boxes, that can mean some real benefits to the journalist. Obviously, job security, career progression, a pay rise, all of these things that are very appealing to journalists in an uncertain media world. Now, the desire to have an impactful story can sometimes result in a one-sided presentation of the facts. In this case, the ABC, in that ABC show, nobody mistreating the animals was directly involved in the racing industry. Yet their programme wasn't framed as a critique of abattoirs or meatworks, but it was a demonstration that racing was callous and uncaring. The impact of the show was significant. Now, I should say that there were many other factors that contributed to this, but those metrics, attendance, wagering, audience, were all down over the Spring Carnival. It's impossible to know how much was brought about by animal welfare concerns, but everyone involved at those race clubs has admitted to me or says to me that they think it played some part. And if you don't think that welfare is something that can impact the future prosperity of the sport and even its existence, here's some research conducted by a major bookmaker in Australia. Said that 70% were aware of racehorse cruelty, and of that 70, 44% were less inclined to bet on racing as a result of it. Of course, this challenge isn't going to go away. And right now, I'm sure there are journalists working on stories on racing and breeding and aiming to drop them at a time most inconvenient. So as an industry, we need to be better prepared. We need to be on the front foot rather than reactive. But more importantly, as an industry, we owe it to our animals, our horses, the horses on which everything is based, to guarantee that we are doing our best to ensure that none endure the fate of those seen in the clips earlier. So it's with this in mind that Thoroughbred Breeders Australia, along with other participant groups and stakeholders, announced a new welfare initiative earlier this month. I should say that all of these organisations who are supporting the initiative are putting their own money into fund this programme. In my view, it's absolutely important that all participants, whether they're breeders, trainers, owners, have a responsibility to make sure our industry is sustainable in the future. That means providing leadership and generating ideas, rather than just waiting for somebody else, whether a racing regulator or a politician, to sort out our industry's challenges. After the ABC report aired in October last year, I had tens of people contact me with suggestions on how to improve welfare. Some of those were really original, creative, and ingenious, but there was really no forum for those to be discussed, evaluated, and then put into action. So together with the National Associations for Trainers and Jockeys, as well as the strong support from all of those groups, TBA has established an independent working group to provide the industry with recommendations that I hope will ensure sustainability. The group is chaired by Dennis Napthine. Dennis is a veterinarian who then went into politics and became the Premier of Victoria. He was also the racing minister while Premier, so he's got a good understanding of the sport. And also on the panel is a representative from the RSPCA, Australia, the leading welfare advocacy group. Another is an equine vet who is a director of the Australian Veterinary Association, with the fourth member being an experienced political insider who's drafted much legislation while a special advisor to 3 different prime ministers. Importantly, none of that group derives their income from racing. And I think this independence shows that we are committed to improving our industry. We're open to new ideas and new thinking. The panel are all credible people, and this also brings legitimacy to their work. In terms of their remit, the group has been asked to look at the current landscape for thoroughbreds in Australia, to look at world's best practice, to consult with the industry, and to draw upon the learnings from other industries. I'm sure the panel can work well with racing's regulators, and that their work will only complement the efforts that are going on already across Australia. Of course, they will also include areas outside the control of racing, such as federal and state legislation for the treatment of horses, as well as legislation relating to how horses are processed. Pleasingly, the announcement of this group was met with public and political support. The Federal Agriculture Minister last week endorsed the working group and offered his department's services, while he also wrote to his counterparts at state level, asking them to get behind the project too. While it's early days, I believe this initiative is already paying dividends. The launch of the project was given significant coverage in every major city in Australia, even making the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, that's not because I used to work there that it got that. I think we had a genuinely good story to tell. Here were participants in an industry that's often fragmented, deciding to work collaboratively together and address its biggest challenge. Add in the fact that the participants were going to fund this themselves, and mix in a few quotes from Chris Waller, our most famous trainer, and it was a good yarn, especially on the back of so much negativity. And this positive message is so important, because while some people will always be against racing, and some people always for racing, I really believe that the vast majority of people can be influenced. What's more, they need to be influenced by our industry. We need to make sure that they see our industry as responsible, acceptable, and that we put the welfare of our horses first. The initiative has also been well received by those in the industry, and every day, more and more organisations are asking how they can get involved. Of course, the panel now has the challenge of delivering recommendations that the industry and governments want to adopt. Given it was set up by participants rather than regulators, the working group know that their suggestions will need to be practical, compelling, and financially sound, and also promise a material benefit to welfare. So no small task. But I'm confident they will meet this challenge, and I hope at the next Asian Racing Conference we may be able to share some of those ideas. Thank you very much.